What's up guys, Houndish here, and today we're jumping in with some Destiny 2 news and updates. And so initially, Bungie give us some clarification on recent changes to a bunch of gear in the game, and they give some updates about the Into the Light live streams. We'll also touch on some juicy elements that we're going to see next week in the reveal, and there are a couple of other Bungie updates. But on top of that, we get some new IGN reporting that indicates Bungie have internally been shaking up the Marathon team quite a bit. Not only that, but the project has ever so slightly changed direction, according to sources, so we'll touch on that. And it further indicates issues between Sony and Bungie, and a potential future shakeup of Bungie leadership. So certainly some interesting bits of news today. As always, I hope you guys enjoy the video, and if you do, a rating below very much helps us out. But without further delay, let's get into it. And first up today, a couple of updates from Bungie. And the D2 team said, firstly, we've updated the 7.3.5 patch notes to include a change to the Manticore that was not listed. And of course, that weapon got a buff in the recent patch, but there's a little more to it. And they say the maximum damage buff from swooping talons has been increased from 40% to 100% in PvE only. So on top of enemies being less accurate when targeting the player in the air, and the final blows and sustained damage with the weapon granting a void overshield, there is that pretty significant damage buff to swooping talons itself. So actually a fairly hefty one, and there's some fun stuff you can do with the weapon. So give us any thoughts you have on that down below. Moving on though, and in relation to Bungie's Into the Light reveals, Bungie Help said, we are aware that the Twitch dropped time requirements for the D2 Into the Light streams to not match what was originally announced. And because we're unable to adjust the requirements for the active drops without removing progress already gained by players, we'll be remaining live until 11:30 AM Pacific time for the next 2 streams to give players extra time to earn the emblems. And so basically, Bungie announced that we needed to watch for 30 minutes and 2 hours or something like that, and that's respectively for the 2 different emblems that can be unlocked, but the actual requirements in the stream appear to be a lot longer, so Bungie's approach is to make the next couple of streams longer than the first one. Let's hope there's enough stuff for them to actually cover and talk about in that time. And of course, following the Onslaught reveal that we got this week, we do know that the next live stream will focus on new rewards. And Bungie have said, lore-wise, Shaxx will be opening up his private weapon reserve for our use, and that contains some weapons that have been frowned upon in the Crucible, but the dev said now's the time to bring them out. And that seems to be our reference to weapons like Recluse, which we've had very strong indications that it will return. But of course there are other PvP specific weapons, things like Mountaintop, Luna's Howl. Plus players have even speculated about weapons like Red Death. I'm not sure if we'll get that lucky, but otherwise in the stream this week we did spot the Hung Jury and the Midnight Coup that appear to have Firefly and Kinetic Tremors, so that's an interesting one. But the team also referred to a new social space that's connected to Onslaught and Into the Light specifically, so I'm sure we can expect to see Shaxx there. Not sure if it'll be in the Helm or in the Tower or somewhere else, but a new mini social space is confirmed for this, which is pretty cool. And yeah, just like most players in the community, following seeing the actual gameplay for Onslaught, I'm now most interested in seeing what the rewards are going to be. So I think next week's stream will be a fairly enlightening one, and let us know your thoughts about it down below. Otherwise though, briefly, Bungie shared that thanks to the amazing LF1 community, the Classic Marathon trilogy is coming to Steam. So if you fancy playing some Classic Marathon, that'll be available soon, and I'll link Bungie's webpage with information about it down below. Up next though, much like we've seen a few times over the past few months, IGN have some more reported about what's going on internally at Bungie. And they posted an article yesterday, Bungie replaces Marathon director amid leadership shakeup and fears of layoffs. And it says, while upcoming D2 expansion The Final Shape is being prioritized, there are growing fears and rumors that layoffs will immediately follow its release. And one person with knowledge of budgets at Bungie told me that nothing adds up and something will need to happen to curb costs unless The Final Shape does so well to cover the gap and allow people to move on to Marathon. And so of course that is a concerning possibility for folks at Bungie. But the article also said, according to multiple sources familiar with matter, Bungie is in the midst of shifting around its creative leadership on Marathon, including removing longtime Bungie designer Chris Barrett from the game director role, and IGN have learned that he's being replaced by former Valorant game director Joe Ziegler, who joined Bungie in 2022. And IGN did ask Bungie and Sony for comment on this, but there wasn't a direct response, and instead, Joe Ziegler confirmed on Twitter that he is now the game director for Marathon. And according to the article, sources have told IGN that Bungie is pouring resources into getting Marathon out the door, and that apparently the game's direction has shifted somewhat, including moving away from custom player characters in favor of a selectable cast of heroes. So that's an interesting one. But it also says when Sony acquired Bungie, they bought it with a number of incubation projects, including a MOBA-like game codenamed Gummy Bears and a new IP known as Matter. But according to sources, Matter was cancelled back in 2020, and the team continued working on a similar project with a slightly different direction until that was too cancelled in late 2022. And also according to sources within the company, there's a growing expectation that senior company leadership will leave in droves moves in the summer of 2026 when the final payouts from Sony's acquisition of the company take effect. And with this in mind, there's a strong push to get Marathon out the door before then and let whoever takes the reins after that, whether it's Sony or Bungie, worry about how the game will be sustained. So this still very strongly indicates that Bungie are in a rocky patch, and a lot of what happens next will hinge on the performance of the final shape, which is something we've discussed recently. So that's one thing, I'll link the IGN article down below, but ahead of this article releasing, Astacross had reported that he received an anonymous email, which supposedly leaks some similar concerns. Of course, it's nearly impossible to verify whether this is true or not, and it's entirely possible that it could be false, so take it with a grain of salt, but it essentially says I'm writing this on a throwaway account, and it indicates that the internal perspective at Sony is very negative towards Bungie, and they see it as a failed investment with strategies being discussed, which revolve around recouping losses. And there are indications as well that upper management's perspective at Sony is that there are too many gluttonous executives at Bungie who aren't doing their jobs. And it goes on to say that it's believed that the workers are skilled, but that the leadership is unable to perform their duties. And with pre-orders being lower than anticipated for Final Shape, Sony believes that finances won't allow Bungie to avoid a takeover, even with another round of layoffs in the future. And it states that Bungie haven't been able to successfully advise Sony teams, and while Lightfall hit internal revenue targets, every target since then has been missed at an escalating decline. And it also says that Bungie leadership often reschedule meetings with Sony leadership, even though that's incredibly disruptive in terms of timing. So obviously a lot of negative things said there, and I guess the suggestion from this anonymous email is that it's coming from somewhere that internally knows what Sony's perspective is on the issue. It's worth noting though, there are a few things there that we already kind of know or have deduced from the things that have gone on between Sony and Bungie recently. Lower pre-order numbers is something that we're already aware of, as well as Bungie's missed revenue targets, and commentary from Sony that we've seen in an official capacity that indicates that Bungie as a studio could be more streamlined and are essentially wasting too much money. So if anything, it would be a confirmation of something we already kind of know. But again, it's entirely possible that this could be fake, so worth discussing, but as we've said previously, I think we're going to have to get through the Final Shape launch and into the sort of episodic cadence. And beyond that, we'll definitely get an indication of how the relationship between Sony and Bungie is moving forward. And if anything, we're more likely to get major news about Bungie later on this year, following whatever happens with the upcoming releases. So time will tell. Definitely take this with a pinch of salt though, and give us your thoughts in the comment section. A couple of final mentions here though, and this week marks a year since Lance Reddick passed away. Of course, Lance was the voice actor for Zavala, and that just seems to have gone by really quickly. And if anything, in the next couple of months, when we start to get Final Shape content, or potentially even before then, with the Into the Light patch, we'll get the first performances from Keith David, who'll be taking over the role of Zavala. So that's going to be interesting, and probably in a lot of ways it will hit home once again when we hear those different voice lines. And very finally, somehow, if you managed to miss that there are a bunch of free emblems found in the Lightfall Collector's Edition, or Final Shape Collector's Edition, should I say, I'm getting stuck in the past here. But yeah, there's 4 new emblems that players can unlock, and I'll link an article down below in case you haven't picked them up just yet, although I think everyone's covered it a whole bunch of times. For today though guys, that's what we've got to speak about. Give us your thoughts on what we've covered and the content that's been revealed for Into the Light. If you found the video useful today though, a rating really does help us out. And be sure as well to get subscribed so I can keep you posted with more Destiny content. Otherwise though, I appreciate you tuning in, and I hope you guys have an awesome day.